Are you all set?
Yes, all set at my end.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Aater and Will, for joining us today. It's been continuous dialogue with Aater and Vixul for quite some time in terms of thinking how we could be able to support our IT services companies. And thank you for taking time out to share your experiences on how we could be able to well position ourselves, how we are able to think in terms of building our niche, and how we could be able to structure our positioning in order to really expand our outreach to our potential clients. Pakistan IT Industry Association has been there for the last 3.5 decades and had been trying to support all the evolution of IT and tech in Pakistan. We are a member base of about 1,000 companies and ranging from a lot of services companies, initially very large scale, to a lot of emerging services companies. But over the last 7 to 8 years, I would say, we have transitioned significantly towards thinking products, thinking innovation, and trying to build homegrown products which are trying to solve local problems, but also positioned globally as well. Especially in the SaaS-based market, we have several products which are leading different quadrants and different, I would say, rankings around the globe in G2 and other similar platforms. However, I think there is a huge potential for the IT services companies to scale in Pakistan. We haven't seen much of mergers. We haven't seen much of acquisitions. And there are a lot of different niche areas where we have built certain businesses, but it's all about, again, defining our positioning, how we could be able to scale. So without any further ado, I'll hand this over to Aater, who will run this 3 series of workshop with our first session today around positioning in IT services. Over to you, Aater and Will. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jamil. Thank you so much for your kind introduction. I guess I'll quickly introduce myself and then ask Will to do the same. So Aater Suleman, I am one of the co-founders of Vixul, which is an accelerator focused exclusively on IT services companies. And what we help do is founders to help scale their businesses. And positioning is absolutely the first thing that we work on when we actually run our boot camps. So the idea here today is to take a slice of that and just share it with the audience that are here today. My personal background: before Vixul, I built an IT services company named Flux7 and exited it to Entity Data in 2019, right before COVID hit. And my passion for helping IT services comes from the challenges I faced when I was a founder of an IT services company. Just in many ways, Vixul is the answer to what I wish I had 10 years ago when I started my company, and trying our best to make the life of services founders easier, because we do believe that that's a very big gap in the market. Not enough companies or organizations that are institutionally trying to help IT services organizations. So I guess what you'll keep hearing from me is positioning, niche area focus, because I'm a big fan of that philosophy, and that is how I built my own startup. And that's what we'll be talking about. And with that, I'll pass it to Will for a quick introduction.
Yeah, hi, this is Will Loving, based in the United States in Richmond, Virginia. And I'm currently founder and CEO of Servos, which is a IT services consulting organization focused on the ServiceNow platform and implementing it for state and local government and potentially federal. So really focusing on the public sector. And prior to that, I had a career in consulting, both at KPMG and Arthur Andersen back before pre-Enron, and then started a consulting company that I'll talk about in a little bit in 2001, and ended up selling it at the end of 2011. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. But I learned a lot through that process, and are doing, it's kind of a contrast of not much focus in that business, but successful, but in a interesting way. And then this business I have now is very focused, and so I'll compare and contrast the two.
Great. Well, special thank you to Will again for taking the time. And with that, I guess we've gone through the introduction. So I'll just start to get into the positioning. But before I do that, I was able to do some analysis on who our audience are today, folks who have registered for this workshop. And I just thought it's kind of interesting to build the point that we will be covering today as well, using an example from the audience itself. So we are looking at a group of mostly CEOs. The average age of the companies that we have today is 9 years. The average headcount is 51. And 80% or so of the attendees are clearly IT services organizations, with a few in there which have a bit of a product flair going in parallel to IT. The one analysis I did was I just looked at the About Us pages for all of the companies and took the LinkedIn description of each of the companies that you all represent, and just took it through a very basic scoring system. And as we will look at those 5 elements that I believe are an important part of any positioning statement, on average, only 2 out of those 5 elements were even present. We aren't even talking about quality yet. They were not even mentioned. More than half of them were not even mentioned in the current descriptions of how you all talk about your companies. And that is one thing that this 3-part workshop is going to aim to help, that everybody scores much better on this before we leave. The other thing that was really interesting was that I guess as a founder, we often believe that we are unique. But then I guess one thing I've seen is if you are aware of one competitor, there usually are 10. And if you're aware of 10, there usually are 100. It's easily off by a factor of 10 to 100. And a very strong data point and a testament to that is I just tried to compare just the companies in this group today, which would be a very small group of just 25 companies. And you will notice that the first half of my list over here, all the way up to API development, nearly every company or a majority of the companies mentioned those exact same services. So that tells you that if within just a small group of 25 companies that are talking on this call right now, which is not even 1%, not even 0.5% of the entire population of just in Pakistan, just globally, how many companies are basically saying the exact same thing? Just probabilistically, anyone who is saying we're doing full stack development, there's probably a good chance that there's more than 10,000 companies out there globally right now that are saying the exact same thing. And that's the idea of positioning, which is coming out from the group of 10,000 and becoming a part of a smaller, more elite group so that your service is not commoditized. But let's talk about the importance of this positioning, and the best way to do it is to talk about data rather than opinions. So I'm going to be leaning on some really interesting data that has been published by an organization named Hinge Marketing. They do these annual reports where they study professional services organizational trends, and they publish data. And they create this very clear distinction and definition of what they call high growth firms. These are the ones that stand out from the pack of companies that they're usually studying. And the first 2 are very relevant to our conversation today. And these are direct quotes out of a book that they've published called Spiraling Up, which I would recommend everyone to read. It's a very light read, about 130 pages, so you can read it pretty quickly. And it has a ton of data and insights. So some of the direct quotes I pulled out was that the high growth firms always pursue a well-defined group of target clients. And frankly, I think when you'll hear the Servos example from Will, I think that's a poster child of how well-defined a group of target clients can be. And I'll let Will go into the detail of that. These high growth firms, they do not just take what comes their way, but instead they actually pursue the prospects that they want. And that's a very fundamental difference as well. When you have a clear target, you go after them rather than just sit there and wait for them to come to you. The second thing is that these companies are 3x more likely to have a very strong differentiator. When the Hinge marketing team graded the differentiation strength, these companies scored a 9 or a 10 on the differentiation scale, whereas your typical firm scores a 2 or a 3. And the result kind of speaks for itself. The high growth firms, as they call them, grow at an average of 90% year over year compared to the 10% growth experienced by your typical average firm. And interestingly enough, this actually also breaks a very big myth that it's not a money game, because on average, the high growth firms are actually spend less money on dollar to dollar, spending less money on marketing compared to your average firm. So what they find through that conclusion is that the difference really is in the positioning. It's about being targeted, being focused, being driven, rather than just be open to anything and not be clearly differentiated and not have a position. So I've been using this word positioning. Let's define it a little. So one of the cleanest definitions that exist is from an industry thought leader here, David Baker. Again, a great book I would recommend, The Business of Expertise by David. And David defines positioning as the pivotal act of clarifying the problem your consultancy is solving for a specific audience and how your approach is achieving that. So you can see clear similarities between the spiraling up concept, and the idea is have specific audience, be very clear on what problem or problems you are solving and what is the approach. Now, what do we do with this positioning? It's really the core foundation of everything that you do around your go-to-market efforts. And in a services company, I strongly want everyone to realize and know that the go-to-market does not stop at the sales and marketing team. In the services company, everyone is in sales, like it or not, in the company. And every single interaction that any one of your engineers is having with the client is still sales, because they are being evaluated and they are contributing directly or indirectly to a potential sale or a referral by providing a better experience or a bad experience, which can trigger the customer to leave. So everyone's in sales, and delivery is really a part of sales in a services organization. But that said, let's start from the left. So what does consistent positioning get you? It gets you the tools and what you need to do for any outbound campaigns you create, any content topics that you want to drive, because once you have a clear positioning, your content becomes very focused on driving that position further. Your campaigns that you run go after that target audience with the problem that we just establish, and lead to better outcomes. Your copy for your website, your LinkedIn, your Clutch profile, anywhere you publicly list your organization is derived out of your positioning. The delivery process, the customer success process, for example, the metrics. If you say that the problem you solve for your customers is cut down the time it takes for their developers to deploy code, then your success metric for a customer has to be how much time did you save. And that's why even customer success management and account management needs to be driven from that same tagline. And then more obvious is the elevator and the sales pitches kind of are all emerging from that same consistent positioning. So consistent positioning kind of sits at the middle. The reason I use the word consistent here, I added that adjective for a very particular reason, that it is extremely common for companies to not have a consistent position. For instance, I will be sharing an example in a second where the same company might talk about themselves completely differently every time you ask them what they do, and not even realize that they're making that mistake. So, but before we get into that, let's double click on what is positioning. So in an IT services firm, in my experience and view, it really boils down to 5 things. What problem you're solving? Who are you solving it for? Who is the target customer? How are you solving it? Your approach, which in case of IT services typically consists of what technology, what underlying technologies we are using, and what process are we using to actually solve the problem. And then last, and actually the most important, is what is unique about, what do we want people to remember is unique about us. It's what you say makes you different. So 5 elements, and we look at these 5 elements throughout the rest of this event. But the problem you solve, who you solve it for, how you solve it, and why are you different than others who claim to be solving the same problem. But even though there is enough data supporting this, and experts have been talking about it for over a decade, that positioning is incredibly important in services firms. It's a very common mistake, which also is a very big opportunity for those who can fix this right. So I literally took this example from somebody who emailed me this morning on LinkedIn. As you can see the time here, just a couple of hours ago. So this message actually showed up in my LinkedIn inbox. I'm a founder of company X. We help companies create digital products, majorly apps and web. Do you see any tech needs at your end that we can fill? Looking for new work. The part that's important is that this was actually a paid campaign that they had run. So they were actually paying to get this message into my inbox. And interestingly enough, this is missing nearly every single element of positioning that I need to understand about this company. If we go back to the slide, it's not clear what problem they are solving for me. All it's saying is this is what they do. Good to know, but how does it impact me? It's not clear who their regular customer is. For all I know, they're sending it to everybody in the world. Why should I respond? There's probably 1,000 others who will not say the same thing. They barely touch on the technology. They are the process is not even touched upon in the entire message. And what's unique about them is extremely unclear, because how are they different from the other 10 messages I'm going to get before the day ends today that'll say that they do more apps and web as well, which is such a broad concept to begin with. But that what hints to me that this company has never actually invested in even building a positioning statement is that then I went to their website, and this is their tagline on the website, which has nothing to do with the message that I received: the best app development company for startups and brands. They could have mentioned that in this message, but they chose not to because it's not consistently applied, and it's not a deliberate position that they have taken. And that doesn't stop there. Then you actually go to the LinkedIn profile, and then it actually is a completely third thing that they actually do, which ends with, we work as a generalist who main focus marketing, BD, and consulting. And this is actually, believe it or not, unfortunately, the standard in our industry for companies to not even know who they are. And if you don't know who they are, you can't express it, and nobody else can understand it, which hurts your referrals, your ability to get success out of these campaigns. And oftentimes then the campaigns or the sales teams get the blame for it, but the fundamental problem somewhere else. So, well, there's the lack of positioning. Then we have companies there where there's just bad positioning, plain out, right? So here's one example of a company that company's positioning. So where the problem stated is, we'll help with anything related to AWS. Actually, I got one of those messages last night as well from a company in Lithuania that basically said, well, we do something related to AWS, but no clarity on what that means, even though AWS has 100+ services at this point. For startups in SMB space, which is a massive space, actually, there is over 1 million startup businesses, businesses that meet this criteria just within the United States. So this is nothing specific about this at this point. The technology that they use is DevOps tools, but then they could have stopped there, but they chose to actually make it further dilute the position by saying, and any other tools, because we learn really fast. So I know that at this point, they're not a specialist in anything. They don't understand anybody's business problem because they work with everybody. So they don't fully understand what my problems may be. And they don't precisely tell me what they are specialists in. And the process is flexible, which means I have to determine what the process is. They are not going to be able to help me determine what's the right way to do this is, because they're being flexible, which they pitch as a feature, but in reality, it's creating more work for me in getting a solution, which is the only thing I care about. And then lastly, what they said about unique is that they will be cheap and flexible. The problem with cheap is that that's also what everybody else is saying, and flexible is also what everybody else is saying. Not going to get a response in exchange for that. But now let's actually compare it to the rare situation when a company does have a good positioning. First of all, there's a lot more words on this slide, but that's the point, which is they've actually thought it through. This is a real positioning. So the problem, it's actually, I guess a fun fact is that this is basically the same company. They're doing the exact same thing in the back end, but just the difference, the way, once you go through the exercise of creating a positioning, how different it sounds. And that's the contrast worth looking at. So the problem being solved is the developers are spending a lot of time fixing infrastructure issues, and the company does not have the budget to hire a full-time DevSecOps engineer, and that's the problem we are going to help you solve. This is very applicable to the customers where it's a small startup, typically less than $2 million in funding, because that's where the budget does not apply, but they still want to develop their software. But to further make it crisp, they are saying that they focus on verticals that involve sensitive data, because that is usually where developers make mistakes and actually get these companies in trouble with clients having data breaches. So it makes it even more precise. Technology is just experts in a handful of things. So we don't do everything. We can't learn everything because we know that we are the best in the world at these 4 or 5 things. And that's what we're going to perpetuate. And we can prove because we are an advanced tier partner with AWS. We are a certified partner with Atlassian, with Terraform. We have case studies with Terraform Vault and Kubernetes. And the process is you, Mr. Customer, do not need to think about how to hire me. I'll tell you what's the best way to do it, because that's how I create success. We'll start with a 1-week engagement. It'll cost you $3,000. It'll be a design sprint. We'll build your platform. Then we will implement your platform. Statistically, every situation is different, but typically it'll take me 6 to 8 weeks to get this done for you. At that point, you will have a platform that you can migrate and start using. And then we understand that you're a startup. Why you are hiring us is, remember that you don't have the budget to hire somebody full-time. So we will then retire into a management role where you will be able to decide how much support you really need. I'll give you the flexibility at the end. And so from a customer's perspective, now all they need to decide is $3,000 worth it or not? And it almost always is. You have made the decision so easy. And they will get to talk to an expert to clarify their vision, if nothing else. And what's unique is that we focus on specifically about these startups, that we understand their problem is that they need support, but not the overhead. And we have designed our model tailored to these companies' needs to give them a jump start on catching up their technical debt quickly, but then give them the flexibility to adjust the level of support as they need. Basically doing the same work in the background. You're actually creating the same CI/CD pipelines on the engineering team, but just look at the difference between the 2 positions taken by the 2 companies. The second one will get actual results versus the first one is basically going to be flying blind, if you will. So the difference when you're in a position of no or bad positioning, kind of to the left, typically your marketing will produce inconsistent results. You will end up chasing every single prospect that will come your way. You'll be trying to win clients by lowering price because that's the only tool you would know, because you're a commoditized service, so cheap wins. And to appease the clients, you keep widening your range of offerings further and further and saying, I do this, I do that. And every time you add something, you further dilute your positioning and become even more commoditized and have even more competitors in the world. And the growth will either stall or will become very, very painful. The impact of a good positioning is that your marketing starts to provide a controllable lead flow, because you actually start getting responses when you go out with that message to people, whether it's outbound or whether it's just content that you create. You are able to say no to clients that will ask you to deviate too much from what you really want to do. Notice how the second positioning, the $3,000 is, there's no conversation about how many people, who's doing it. Is this going to be in Pakistan or is this going to be in the US? The idea is $3,000 and you get it done. And the customer is now thinking in terms of, I need this platform, not thinking in terms of, I need 2 people and where are they going to be? So you can charge them a price, you can price things, and you can charge gross margins easily, 50% plus. I do get sometimes funny looks when I say 50% plus higher gross margin. So I always like to state that in my company that I exited in 2019, our average gross margin on projects was 65%. And the best projects that we would do would have an average gross margin of 85%. And we would hardly ever do anything below 45. That was the cutoff. If we were not getting 45, we would not even bother to do it. the beauty of that is that when you are in that upward spiral, you have more gross margins that then enable you to have extra cash that further allows you to build IP and invest even more in lead generation and even better positioning. And then you start to accelerate growth and you start to spiral up. So we maintained about a 70% year-over-year growth for 6 years consistently. In fact, the average was even higher, but that was when the company had reached a pretty sizable size. So I guess with that, there's all the theory in the world that I have shared with some interesting data, but nothing beats actually looking at a real world example and talking to an expert who has actually done it both ways and been successful both ways, but has a lot of lessons to share. So with that, I'll pass it to my co-presenter here, Will. Will, over to you.
Great. Sorry, I'm trying to get the camera to turn on. There we go. Great. Thank you all, and thanks, Arthur. That was interesting. I always learn something when Arthur talks about things too. I mean, I don't care if you've done this 10 times. There's always something to learn through this process. And so let me share my screen, and I'll talk through 2 different examples. Let's see. I'll share just the window. Okay. Hopefully that size is good for everybody. Great. So what I'm going to talk about here is 2 different examples. So this Ironworks Consulting was a consulting firm that myself and my business partner started in 2001. So we started it in February 2001, right after the .com, sort of boom bust, where frankly, people thought at that point in time that the internet was kind of a waste of money, and they spent millions of dollars building these .com brochureware sites and got no return. And you remember the whole .com bubble bust. So it was in some ways you might think a very bad time to try to start a technology consulting firm. But it actually ended up being a good time. I think what's interesting about, and when I talk about Servos, the company I'm running now, we started that during the pandemic, which also seemed like a bad time to start a company, but you can't ever pick your timing. And actually, again, it kind of worked out in a good way, because if you're small and you're just getting going, and lots of other big bloated companies are having to lay off and shrink to survive, you've got the advantage because you haven't built up that bloat yet, and you can be a little bit more agile and pick your battles, move quickly, and maybe price it differently. And so, but anyway, so Ironworks, we started in 2001, and the initial focus, and I don't have this in the slides, but just to kind of explain why, our strategy in that .com, the wake of the .com bubble bust, was our strategy was that all these big organizations, GE, Mayo Clinic, Chase Manhattan Bank, had built these, $4, $5, $6, $8, $10 million web infrastructures to support their .com site and content management to make changes, and sometimes e-commerce. And they weren't going to just turn them off because they weren't successful or things were getting pulled back. They had to, maintain that infrastructure. And so our strategy early on, when we first started the company, was we'll come in, and we had done this for a division of General Electric. So we kind of had proven the model a little bit in the prior company we were working for. But our strategy was to be really a managed services provider for these complex custom-built web infrastructures that had been put in during the late 90s. And so that was our strategy, and we figured we'll come in on a managed services kind of model and just support these custom-built systems. Even though we didn't build them, we'll come in. We know it could be bad code or fragile infrastructures. We'll come in and kind of help shore up the infrastructure and put good app development processes in place to make sure proper testing is done and all that sort of thing. So that was our goal. We quickly realized that we couldn't, unless we were right at the at the right time talking to a customer who was just finishing up building a big system. If we weren't at the, there was a small window of time where they're finishing up the build, maybe they've outsourced it to a big consulting firm, finishing up the build, and then figuring out how they're going to do the maintenance and support of it. And there's a short window of time for them to make that selection. Either they work with the company that built the system, or they kind of cobble together an internal team to support it. And then after that, they don't worry about it anymore because they've sort of got it under control. And we realized that it was a really, we were focused because we had a focused service. We weren't focused around who we're selling it to. It was like, well, we'll work with anybody. But we didn't realize, it's sort of product market fit. We didn't realize that there was just a very small window where we had to be there at the right place to sell the work. So anyway, long story short, we were able to get a couple of clients. American Cancer Society had just finished up I think a $12 or $15 million rebuild of their cancer.org website using Sapient to do the work. And we caught them at the right time because Sapient was proposing something like $150,000 a month to support the infrastructure going forward. And the American Cancer Society thought that was very expensive. And so we came in at like $50,000 or $60,000 a month and as our proposal, and they chose to go with us because we knew the platform that they worked on and that built. So we got the work there. So that first made us feel like, okay, great, this model does work, and this is a sizable 12-month engagement that we got, and we got rolling with the company. So that was, and frankly, we were about to shut the company down. We were 6 months in. We had a little bit of investment from a wealthy friend of ours that believed in us, and but we didn't want to, basically waste all our money and not make it. But we were close to just saying, hey, this isn't working, because we'd only sold a couple little deals, and we got this sizable American Cancer Society deal, and then we knew, okay, we've got a company now. At least we can build a team around this project and keep looking for the next American Cancer Society managed services type contract. And we frankly never found another one like that. We sold a couple of smaller deals, but never really were able to make it. So then the economy and everything started to recover 2002, 2003, and we were able to, then we just kind of fell back on our experience from prior consulting companies where we would just build custom applications for people. So that's what we ended up building in the company is, and I'm going to show you the slides I'm going to show you are actually from our pitch deck that our investment bankers used when we were going out to market the company to sell it in 2011. So we grew the company over, and I'll show you the revenue and that in a minute, but we grew the company from 2001 to 2011 and decided it was a good time to see if there was a strategic or private equity buyer for the company. We had two investors in the company that weren't really pressuring us to sell the company, but to them, unless there was an exit, they weren't really getting the big return on their investment. So there was a little pressure, and we were 10 years in, and we'd gotten the company to about just under 60 million in revenue, with about 45% gross margins and about 25% EBITDA. And so it was profitable and throwing off cash, which was nice for the owners. But we decided, let's see if the market if there's a good buyer out here for a nice multiple. And anyway, so we hired an investment banking firm and did a broad process, and ended up selling the company to a publicly held consulting company in Washington, D.C. area at the very end of 2011. So it was a very successful outcome, but getting there was not focused and not specialized like Arthur was talking about. It was more of we were kind of figuring things out as we go, and we could do anything, but the core was really around just building applications for people, and it was mostly all commercial for-profit businesses, large corporations, and then we started getting into the federal federal government consulting space towards the end, and I'll show you that revenue model too. So anyway, these slides are actually and you'll see they're kind of dated and not, and they're kind of 2011-ish slides, but the reason I'm going to go through them with you, and I'm not going to go in detail in each one, but just to show you how unfocused we were as a company. So this was our kind of, I guess you could call it the elevator pitch slide. So you can see, we're working across a bunch of different industries in the middle there: healthcare, government, manufacturing, retail, distribution. Really, we had a big healthcare practice where we were mostly helping the healthcare payers, but for them, we were really doing very little technology work. It would fall under the category of management consulting, but we were basically project managers and program managers helping the healthcare payers run large projects. And there was sometimes IT components to those projects, but a lot of times it was business projects. Like we helped WellPoint, the big insurance payer, build out a consumer-directed healthcare plans, and we just had lots of project managers and BAs on the different projects, helping the employees at WellPoint run these projects. So had nothing to do really with the technology work. And that kind of went under that green bubble, business and IT alignment. That was really that practice. We had a creative user experience practice that we called interactive, and that was really a sort of digital agency, but really really good design, but not true agency design capabilities. So it was more of the sort of creative strategy, user experience design, information architecture practice that was basically built all the front ends to the app dev projects we did. So the portal and content management was really the area where we just, the practice or team that was just doing custom development work for customers. We did have a specialization, and if I look back and said, what should we have maybe focused on primarily that we had deep skills in and was a need and a niche that lots of companies had, it was web content management. So back in the early 2000s, that was one of the big shifts in web development was, it used to be when you wanted to change text on the website, like change a phone number, you had to go recompile the Java code. Now, with content management systems, you could extract that code from the content and then allow non-technical people to make content changes and have it go through a approval process and all that. And right now, I mean, that kind of seems like, of course that's available, but back then it was kind of a new thing. And then we did have a specialization around that, but we didn't lean into it as much as we probably could have. But so this is one slide that kind of showed at a high level what the company did. And then this kind of talked about our interactive group. We built mobile apps. Not really. We tried to do some of that. We didn't do a whole lot of mobile. We didn't really do much at all in social. So when you're trying to sell the company too, you're also trying to put some lipstick on, on the services. So we tried to kind of pump up our interactive, what we did in interactive, because that was driving a higher multiple at that time during the late 2010, 11 for buyers, because everybody was kind of looking for that deep technical skills combined with front-end interactive design capabilities. And then the business and IT alignment was really this program management office. So we were basically running big PMOs for healthcare companies primarily, mostly on the payers side. We built a little bit of a BI, business intelligence practice, but never really got that off the ground. And then, the IT strategy and road mapping, we did a little bit of that as well, but primarily this whole practice was around healthcare. And frankly, it was around 2 or 3 accounts, WellPoint and Anthem and a couple payers. So that was that practice. And then, and then we talk about business IT, BI and IT strategy roadmap, which again, we did a little bit of that, but not a ton. and then here's our partnership. So these are all the software companies that we worked with at the time. You know, obviously some of these are gone now, but we did, you know, we basically had a bunch of engineers that were well skilled and experienced in .NET development. So that was all the Microsoft practice. And then the rest of the team was all Java architecture and development. And so that was, you know, we basically had a Java team and a Microsoft team. And that was and this is all pre-cloud. So we even had hosting providers that we worked with some. But you can see a lot of if people are on this team or, you know, on the call are my age, then you will remember some of these firms like Ectron or Alfresco or Interwoven or Endeca Sitecore. They're all these web content management systems. So that's where, again, we had a lot of skills in that area. But as you can see, no real focus around a specific service offering, no focus around the types of customers that we helped, and no real focus around the software or technology. But this is the slide that kind of shows the revenue from 2005 through 11 when we sold. And it's really just the breakdown between commercial and federal government. You know, the 2008, 2009 recession, we luckily had started to work on getting into the federal government space in 2006 and 2007 and just getting our foot in the door. And then really it started to accelerate once we got into 2 or 3 different federal agencies and partnerships with some of the primes that were working in those agencies. And what was great about it, as you can see, the commercial revenue really went flat for 3 years, and the federal revenue is what saved us and kept us growing. So it looks like we were strategic, and, you know, maybe you could argue we were, but we didn't know a recession was coming in 08, 09. We just knew that we wanted to grow the company, and we got it, you know, we got in on the federal space just through an opportunistic deal and just really leaned into federal and started to build a really strong federal business, not as the prime, but as a, you know, always a subcontractor with other primes like the big, you know, Booz Allen and you know, the big contractors. But what that also helped us in is when we ended up selling the company in 2011, the reason we found the buyer we did, which was more of a government contracting company, you know, about $800 million, you know, primarily federal government contractor, is they saw that we had this interactive team, we had this, you know, strong app development team, but we had also had experience with federal government. So they knew if they bought us, we would have people in the company that had worked in the federal space, so it wouldn't be totally foreign to us. So that mix actually helped us become attractive to this buyer who was looking for us, for a firm like us specifically. And before I talk about Servos, just kind of, I'll show you some of the, you know, pros and cons to it. But just going back to the sale process, you know, we hired an investment banker. It was the firm down there, Signal Hill, it's now called. They got bought again, but anyway, they marketed us very broadly to both private equity and strategic buyers. And at the, you know, like I said, around early 2011 is when we started the process. We had some interest from IBM and Accenture and then some smaller, you know, regional type buyers. And after they looked at us in more depth, they all kind of fell out of the process because, you know, Accenture's and IBM's, they're going to buy a niche that they don't currently have. And, you know, if you look at this firm, it's almost like we had 3 different consulting firms under one roof: a management consulting firm, a sort of digital agency, and then just a system integrator app dev shop. So those types of buyers, you know, once they looked under the hood, they weren't interested anymore. And really everything kind of fell out, and we were 8 months into the process and had no buyer. So, you know, we had kept it quiet because we didn't want the employees to know that, you know, that we were selling the company, to freak them out. And we had spent a lot of time on this process. And that's one of the challenges when you are marketing your company to sell it. It is a big distraction for the owners and managers of the firm, because they're constantly, talking to the bankers and meeting with potential buyers. And so you have a real danger of taking your eye off the ball of running the business while you do this process. So we invested all this time and effort into it. And we were like, well, it looks like we just need to put our heads down and keep growing the company and think about this again in 4 or 5 years. And our investment bankers, of course, wanted a deal to be done, because all they had so far was a retainer, and unless a deal happens, they don't make any money. So they pushed us to send it out, another wave out to a second layer of strategic buyers that are maybe not as active in the market, but might be interested. And this one company, ICF, was interested, and that's who we ended up selling it to. So one of our investors kept saying it only takes one. And we were like, well, it'd be nice if we had 2 or 3 that were interested, so we could play them off each other and try to get the best deal possible. But we ended up selling the company to this strategic buyer for $100 million. And it was, that was about 6.5 times trailing EBITDA, and which was a, good multiple at the time. And it was a all cash deal with no earnout, which was awesome. And at the time we didn't realize how unique that deal was. They usually do earnouts, and the reason they didn't do an earnout with us is because they had bought another consulting firm prior to us and did an earnout, and it really kind of messed up the whole deal, because the firm that they bought just focused on their little business and didn't integrate with the rest of the firm. So we got kind of lucky with timing there that we didn't have an earnout. In fact, what happened was, after we sold, if we had an earnout, we probably wouldn't hit our numbers, because the distraction around integrating and taking our eye off the business to worry about trying to integrate in this big buyer that we just sold to, we didn't grow as much as we thought we would after we were acquired. But so anyway, to wrap that story up, like I said, it was like having 3 different consulting firms under one roof. It was difficult to market. We didn't ever really build a real marketing lead generation function in the company. We tried to a little bit, but we never were very successful at building a real marketing function. We mostly sold new business through word of mouth and our seller doer kind of partner sales model. We had a couple direct salespeople. I already talked about the challenges of running a banker process when you don't have that specialization, and then just scaling is more difficult, because we're which practice area do we focus on? Do we try to build and we ended up really wasting a lot of time and effort trying to build practices that we thought were going to be very successful, like the business intelligence practice, or trying to lean in on our agency digital interactive practice that never really scaled. So but we built a successful business and ended up having a great exit, but that was also in 2001 and 2010, so I think times have changed as well, where I feel like now in this market, large companies are willing to give projects to smaller consulting firms if they're very focused. Usually the big firms want to work with, the big companies want to work with Deloitte or Accenture or the big brand names, but they're willing to also work with the smaller firms if they are very focused. And I think that again supports the argument to focus. So I'll switch over to what the company I'm running now. So after I sold the company, we stayed on and for a couple of years and helped grow the company. And then I took some time off, and we had because it was an all cash deal, we had a 5-year non-compete. Basically couldn't do consulting at all in the United States for 5 years. So it was pretty strict. And I thought, hey, I'm not doing consulting anymore. I'm done. I'm going to go invest in some startups and create a startup incubator and do some other stuff. And I did that for a while, and that was interesting and fun. And I lost some money investing in product startups. And then I decided, what I really know about is consulting. And that's actually where I met Aater. We were trying to kind of help consulting firms, get ready for marketing their company or operational consulting and that sort of thing. So we sort of got into helping other consulting firms. And then that's when I came across the ServiceNow platform. I invested in a startup consulting firm that was focused purely on just implementing the ServiceNow platform, and within the ServiceNow platform, focusing on just the HR human resources module of ServiceNow. And they're called the ANTI, ANTI. Their whole brand is around, we're the antithesis of consulting. So if you look them up, it's the anti.com. But they're I invested some money in them and watched them grow, and they're still doing great. They're up to about, I think, 50 or 60 people now, and have really built this very successful niche around ServiceNow HR. And they're working with their focus market is not an industry specific, but it's, you know, large corporations. So McDonald's, United Airlines, Mayo Clinic are some of their customers, and they basically implement the ServiceNow platform to automate HR processes like employee onboarding and offboarding and employee service portals and those types of things. And they integrate with Workday and all that. So anyway, that's what they built, and I watched them grow. And then as ServiceNow was starting to build out new parts of their platform, one of their new modules is the customer service management module. And that's obviously focused on, you know, either call center, contact center, customer service, case management, or anything that's outwardly facing that a workflows that a company is going to do. So we decided to get together and build a new company, this time kind of like the HR one, except this time focused on ServiceNow only and the customer service module only of ServiceNow. So that's how we came up with Servos, and we got going in May of 2019, so right before the pandemic, and got started. The goal was not necessarily to get into the public sector, maybe down the road, but initially it was just let's go after large corporations and that already own ServiceNow. So that was the other interesting thing. What I'd learned from the HR firm that I invested in is the partnership and the way ServiceNow manages their implementation partner model is they haven't really built a big PS organization within ServiceNow. So they really rely on the partners to do all the implementation work. And the ServiceNow sales team will bring the partners in to the deals. And I never had much success at that at Ironworks. You know, we partnered with Microsoft and Oracle and others, and we got brought into a few things, but never really much came out of that. So we didn't actually value partnerships at all with software companies back at Ironworks. But obviously with the Servos model, we were frankly 100% reliant on the ServiceNow partnership and those salespeople bringing us into deals. We had to obviously prove ourselves that we had the capability and we could run good implementations. So I hired a person from ServiceNow that was a senior architect, and he came on board and gave us, you know, validation and hey, we've got skills in-house to build, you know, to implement ServiceNow. And we tried to sell some deals initially to some commercial and enterprise accounts, and never really got too much traction there early on. And then the pandemic hit, and anybody that didn't already own ServiceNow was not going to go invest in a new platform during the pandemic. Everybody was just focused on, you know, how do we stay afloat and how do we deal with none of our employees coming into the office and work from home. So it was just a major distraction. So we really were having a hard time. It almost feels like back in the beginning of the Ironworks days where I was like, I'm not sure this is going to work. And then through a relationship this architect had with the ServiceNow sales team, the state and local sales team brought us into a deal in the state of South Dakota. And during the pandemic, there was, you know, all these state organizations were inundated by citizens requesting things, whether it was Department of Health issues around COVID or requests for unemployment insurance. So people were laid off or out of work, and they would go to the state employment commission and try to apply for unemployment benefits. And in the state of South Dakota, they were just overwhelmed by the applications for unemployment. So, and they already own the ServiceNow platform. And that's what's been a real key with this business is ServiceNow, most big companies in the world own ServiceNow, and they bought it as a ticketing, IT help desk ticketing system, which is what it started out as. And it's because BMC Remedy, which was kind of the gold standard for IT ticketing, fell out of favor, I don't know, 10 or 12 years, 15 years ago, maybe 12 years ago. And ServiceNow was right there to capture that market. So what's nice is a lot of companies already own ServiceNow, and as ServiceNow comes out with new parts of the platform, they're willing to adopt those because they already own the platform. So, so the state of South Dakota already owned ServiceNow and used it for IT ticketing, but now the ServiceNow salespeople had pitched them on, hey, we can help you with this using our virtual chatbot, virtual agent. We can help you manage these incoming unemployment insurance requests. So we started off with a $50,000 project to come in and just stand up this chatbot to take people's questions about unemployment insurance and field those questions and then direct them based on that. So anyway, we got in the door there, built that out for them successfully, and then that turned into us building out $1 million project to put a whole new front end on the whole unemployment insurance application process and implement case management so that the state employees could manage these cases as they came in. So then it just kind of took off, and South Dakota became our largest customer in 2020 and late 20 and into 21. And then based on that work, we got into the city of Atlanta and helped them with a citizen portal around their 311 citizen requests, like reporting a pothole or a tree fell across the road or applying for a business license and those types of citizen services. So again, the strategy early on was not to pick the public sector industry as a focus, but we ended up opportunistically getting into that, and then we just leaned into it. So so now fast forward to beginning of 2023, and we are focused purely, again, on the ServiceNow platform, purely on the customer workflows or customer service part of the platform. And there's another piece of ServiceNow, I don't know how many people or have exposure to it, but they call it App Engine, but it's basically this low code, no code part of the platform. So, which is, a fairly new kind of a sector where you can build anything you want on the platform, but leveraging the core infrastructure of it. So we're doing a little bit of that too. But then now number 4 here is state and local government. So that's our focus. And again, we built that focus after we figured out what a good place it was to work, and we just leaned into it. So these numbers are a little outdated. We're close to 50 people now. We did 10 million in revenue in 2022, and we're at about a $12-13 million run rate now for 2023. Our gross margins are in the 45 to 50% range. You can see our focus here is, industry vertical, state and local government, customer workflows, and then we're starting to build out some differentiators around what we do on the platform. We've built some reusable components that we call Servos Gov, which is things like payment integration and actually content management, which is something that the ServiceNow platform doesn't do very well. So we've built a module on top of it to do that. Grants management's a solution that a lot of states need. So we've built that out for a couple customers and are starting to make that reusable and redeployable. The other thing we found is most of the existing ServiceNow partners are really techie, tech only, and don't even think about the user experience. So bringing in this experience design capability on top of the platform is a little bit of a differentiator in our market and the competitors. And ServiceNow's starting to verticalize their solutions more heavily. So we're leaning into that. They've got a product called Public Sector Digital Services that layers in on top of this customer workflows module. And so we're a launch partner for that new product and are leading the way there. So even though we're 50 people or so, and we're competing with Deloitte and Accenture and then some of the very large pure play ServiceNow partners, because of our focus on state and local, we've kind of risen to the top within the ServiceNow partner ecosystem. and literally the CEO of ServiceNow knows who we are because we implemented this thing for the state of Florida when they had a hurricane hit in September. We put up an emergency response portal on the ServiceNow platform for state of Florida, and so we're, even though we're a 50-person company, ServiceNow really goes to us first for state and local work in the customer service area. So it's really been a huge driver in growing our business. So in 2021, we did $2.5 million in revenue, and then 2022 we did $10 million. So major, growth over that period of time. And I think, it's due primarily to this specialization and focus. Both the customers like that we're focused on it, and the ServiceNow field team and partnership teams like that we have that focus. So one, it helps us with marketing. Like Arthur was saying earlier on, we've started to build out a lead generation marketing team. And frankly, one of the things that worries me the most about our business right now, one of the risks is that we depend 90% on the ServiceNow field team, sales teams to bring us into deals. Once we get into an account like a South Dakota or any state, we can take it from there. Once you get in the door, then we are good at building relationships and looking for other opportunities. But getting in the door initially, we don't have any network of people that we know in state government. Now we do, but at the beginning we didn't. So we need to build our own marketing function so we can drive our own leads and not be 100% dependent on the ServiceNow field teams. But it sure has been nice to have that focused partnership, because they'd rather bring us in than Deloitte, because Deloitte might pitch Salesforce or a competing platform. They know that when they bring us in, we're not pitching anything else because all we do is ServiceNow. So that has helped us a lot. So again, the partnerships and channels are key to our success. And recruiting is easier. I say it's easier. It's not. These people are hard to find because the skill sets that we need are in high demand. But we're looking for a specific skill set. It's not like we're looking for Java people and .NET people and MuleSoft experience. We're looking for ServiceNow experience. So we at least have a focus there, and that helps. And then the depth and specialization, we can go, we've got some of the best, I think, ServiceNow skills and people in the industry, in the company. What's also been nice sort of around that recruiting is there's such an M&A market right now for ServiceNow specialized companies that all our competition has been bought. I mean, really, it's crazy. Everybody that we compete against in this maybe 60 to 150 person companies has been acquired. So now after they got acquired, they're now owned by NTT Data. Actually, one of the big ones, Acorio, got bought by NTT Data, same company that Arthur sold his company to, and Accenture's bought one. And anyway, what happens now is all those people that liked working for the smaller high growth company are now part of this big, huge company, and they're starting to bail out of there. So we're finding these great people that want to get back to a smaller, more nimble company. So it's been very easy is a relative word, but easier to recruit people, good people to the company, because they're ready to get out of the big, crazy, large companies. And they also, our strategy, or my strategy with the company is, could we sell it this year? Yeah, probably could sell it for 20, 25, maybe even 30 million. But I'm not doing this to sell it for 30 million. I want to get to 100 million in revenue by 2030. That's kind of the strategy that we've set out. And I want to sell it for, 300 million. So that, so we're kind of going big, and people, as we recruit people, they like that, because we're not just, going to flip the company and then they're now working for another big company again. So, so it's been a good message, and it's been a lot of fun and a lot of work, but, and the gross margins are good. I don't have the gross margins that Arthur had in his business yet, but we're trying to figure out some ways we can fix price some things and do some other things to increase the gross margins. But frankly, at 45 or 50% with the overhead we have, we're in the 30% range for EBITDA, and that's been great to have the cash to invest in the growth of the business. I don't think we're gonna need to take on outside money to grow. We want to try to do this organically as much as we can. and reinvest in the business to grow. If there's an opportunity to buy some competitors at some point to grow faster, we will certainly look at that. But with our $100 million plan, it really doesn't require acquisitions, because those can be costly and not very effective unless you're just trying to roll something up and flip it. And that's not the strategy here. But there are challenges with focus, and this is the last slide. But so scalability, how, if in the focused area we're in, are we going to be able to find enough revenue to get us to 100 million by 2030? I think we are. Early on, I was not sure, but given how broad this sector is with customer service, and we have yet to do a call center implementation. I kind of thought we'd be just doing these big call center implementations. Instead, because we got in the state and local space, anything like right now for the state of Missouri, we're implementing this Medicaid renewal process that's going to go live in a couple months. And anything that touches a citizen and involves a request for help or information or support and creates a case that can be managed by the employees of the state is in our wheelhouse. So it's pretty broad. I think what we're going to start to do as we get more mature and have more experience in certain areas is we're going to build specialized vertical experience in things like health and human services or social services or transportation. So that's how we're going to specialize and have practices possibly within this public sector business that we're creating, because that's what Deloitte and Accenture and those firms are doing. They have specialists in certain areas within a public sector. But anyway, so scalability can be a challenge, but I feel like we're feeling good about that. The other thing is patience. At the beginning, it's very hard, especially when you're trying to pay your mortgage and feed your family, and you haven't sold any work yet, and you're focused in this one area, but you can't seem to sell any work in this one area. It's hard not to say, well, yeah, we can do a Salesforce project, or we can do a custom app dev, or we can, it's hard to keep that patience. So, to get the company started, I ended up having to put in about, I'd say from 0 to positive cash flow, and we were probably had to invest about $1 million in the company to get it, to get us to that stage. And so, without that, frankly, without that money, if we had totally bootstrapped it, it'd be hard to have that patience. You're going to quickly, get into something that maybe is not in your focus area. So having that funding to help get us there allowed us to keep that focus and patience. And I guess that kind of goes into the runway bullet. It's like you need enough runway to be able to get your foot in the door in these focused areas. And the best scenario is if you hire somebody or you have a team that has experience doing this before. And I kind of hired that team because I didn't have the ServiceNow experience. I had good relationships in the ServiceNow ecosystem, but I had to hire a couple of very expensive people at the beginning to make sure that I had we could portray our experience and get the trust of not only the ServiceNow teams out in the field, but the customers. So that's kind of the two stories. I'd love to take questions, or Arthur, what you guys want to do next. I'm happy to answer any questions that anybody has. I'm sure you are too.
Well, I'm thinking, let me just go through a couple of more slides, and then we can just take questions together at the end, because we're a little tight on time. So I'll just capture.
Yeah, great. Okay. All right. I'll transfer it back over to you.
Sounds great. If you want to stop sharing, I'll take it from there.
Where's my stop share? Here it is. Oh, there we go.
All right. So thank you so much, Will. The stories always fascinate me, by the way. And while I'm pulling my slides up, I think I'm gonna maybe mention a couple of things there, which I think is also answering one of the questions about the relevance of the stories. So I think the difference between Servos and my startup Flux7 was that we actually did use offshore a lot in Flux7. In fact, I would say about 90% of my delivery was being done outside of the United States, and mostly out of India and Pakistan. So and that is actually what enabled us to get those higher gross margins. So Will, I guess that'll be my thing to you, is as you're thinking about the next step, maybe this would be a great thing to be thinking about, is how do you take advantage of offshore? Because that's what got us from the 40, 45 probably we would have gotten in the US to the 65 margin that we got. And I think the second part also was really interesting, just comparing your story to mine, Will, kind of looking at wearing that lens today for the first time from that perspective, that we did not actually need as much of a bootstrap capital when we started Flux7. I think it was more of just giving up salary for about a year and a half. And I think that also had a lot to do with the offshoring, because we were not actually we were hiring experts, but we were hiring experts in geographies where the baseline salaries were lower. So just a couple of things that really jumped out at me today as I was hearing through the story. But with that, let me actually just jump in. We'll try to catch up on a few minutes here as well. So so kind of hearing the story and the importance of positioning, I think that's all great, but how do we turn this into actionable for our audience over here? So that's the next part, about what do we turn this into? So actually a lot of inspiration from David Baker again, the book I mentioned earlier, and some of my own thoughts and experiences kind of created this 10-point test for each of the companies that you all can actually go through on your current positioning and try to understand if if the answer to these questions is a yes or a no. I'll just touch on one or two examples. For example, is your positioning currently, are you clear on the problem that you're actually solving? And is there a clear pain point, and is it actually specific to your target customers so that it can jump out at people? And I made the scoring system very, very simple. The idea is that if you're actually going through this and you end up with 8, 9, or 10 yeses to these 10 questions, that means you're actually in a good position. And if the answer is more, in fact, the overwhelming majority will score a 3 or a 2. You'd be surprised when you actually start to go through this. Say, take a look at a written place where you have talked about yourself, or what you typically say about yourself when you have an elevator pitch, and try to compare it to these questions. It's very common for companies to end up with a 2 or a 3, and that's the average company. That's where the high growth companies come in that actually end up scoring a 9 or a 10, and hence the difference. But the exercise does not stop here. This is a multi-part, and we'll be meeting again next week, same audience. And what I want to leave everyone with is a homework, which is to not just stop here with the theoretical knowledge, but let's actually put this in action. And the homework between now and next time would be to actually find your own positioning. Take what you do today and turn that into a clear positioning statement of the problem, the customer, what's unique about you, what's your technology, and what's your process, those 5 elements. In fact, what I request is that if you can actually submit it for feedback even before next week, I can actually give you digital feedback ahead of time, and then we can actually move to the next step during the second half of the workshop itself. And what we want to do next week will be to actually review the positioning and then convert it into an actual elevator pitch that then you can start using on your LinkedIn when you meet people, when you talk about it. And if you don't know what an elevator pitch, it would read something like this, where this is my elevator pitch at Vixul these days, just kind of talking through who you are, what you do, who are you targeting, why are you unique. If you read this elevator pitch, you'll get the answers to nearly all the questions about our positioning at Vixul as it stands today. We are not a technology company, so the only thing you will not get is the technology. Everything else is right in here. And before I just throw this over the fence to you and say, find your own positioning, I do want to show you what resources you have available while you go through this homework. So you will have to make time. I can't help you there. But if you make the time, what I've done is put together a lot of examples and some tips, in fact, on how to do this process very quickly, because this is the kind of process that can take years if you start doing it in a ad hoc fashion. So, but then there are structured shortcuts that I've identified helping a lot of companies over the years. For example, how do you find your customer? Well, you can start with boiling the ocean and start thinking and dreaming up all kinds of things. But the better answer is you already have a company. Nearly everyone on this call has a company with customers. Just write down the name of your 3 favorite customers. Just try to understand what's common between them. it's very easy to say nothing is common between them. So that's why the second comment is look hard, because there's always commonalities. Either you will see them in the first order attributes like size, verticals, where they are located geographically, your demographics of your customer, or you would sometimes have to look harder into the second order attributes. And for that matter, I've put down 10 or so examples of the kind of attributes we have seen. For example, one of the attributes that we used at my company was a second order attribute, which was that we would go after companies that had over 100 folks in their IT department. And that is information you can get on LinkedIn and filter on. And that actually told us that the IT department is big enough that if I build a CI/CD pipeline, they will get enough benefit that they'll be willing to pay me $500,000 to build a CI/CD pipeline. And when you're that structured and you know what the value the customer is getting, doesn't matter whether you're sitting in Pakistan or US, you ask for the value you're providing and you price it at that, and hence the gross margins. Similarly, so coming up with that exercise, I'm just going through one example, but and then try to drive that, from that drive what customers you want. Similarly, for each of the other attributes, I've tried to give at least a few examples and some very actionable steps that you can take, for instance, for the problem on how to identify what problem you're actually solving. It's very easy to, again, answer this with, we provide resources that have XYZ skills, but that's not actually the problem you're solving. What's the problem? How would the customer describe it? And that can be done with either asking the customers themselves or you acting like you are the customer and writing those answers down yourself, but write it in the voice of the customer, not in your own voice. You have to take 5 minutes and kind of try to think like your customer, not yourself. I won't take you through all the details, but for each of those attributes, examples, we have plenty of examples, but while you're doing this homework, if you want to reach out, my email address is right here. Just feel free to send me a message. We can always have a email exchange, maybe a chat if we need to, just get on a Slack or chat or something, and let's actually talk through. But the workshop second part would, the expectation is that when we meet next week, you would have actually spent the time to go through these 5 attributes and identified your positioning. And then from there, taken the 10-point test to make sure that the test, again, the 10-point test here, to make sure that it's meeting the criteria for that. And with that, I'll just pause here and let's actually dive into questions. So you all have the ability to unmute, but before we go through that, let's actually ask, I guess I'll just moderate and answer / ask Will the questions that we already got in text. So the first question was from Arsalan, which is IT services should focus on one technology and stick with that only, or it must have a diverse technologies to keep relevant in the market. I guess I'll give you my shot at this really quickly. So my experience was that AWS was a very fast moving ecosystem, and so was DevOps. So I had to come up with a new technology to focus around every 2 years. So over the course of 7 years of when I ran the company, we moved through 3 technologies, 3 completely, not completely different, but 3 sister technologies. First 2 years, it was about infrastructure as code automation in AWS. Next 2 years, it was about containers and getting applications moved into containers and setting up CI/CD pipelines to deploy them. By that time, the enterprise clients had started moving into the cloud, so security had become more important. So the last 2 years were all about securing people's cloud environments. So same kind of underlying technology, but solving different problems on what was relevant to the market. And my general experience is every 2 years, you have to come up with something slightly different. Will, would you like to add something?
Yeah, I would say that's one of the things I am figuring out, but I think what I'm trying to do to make sure we don't miss some ability to grow by just focusing on one technology, ServiceNow, is I'm letting the clients and their situations drive what I build out as surrounding skill sets. So for example, we're starting to see that there's this integration platforms like the Boomi or the MuleSoft that's out there, especially in these large organizations, whether it's state or commercial. So so we're going to possibly start to build out more of a MuleSoft practice or skill set that complements our ServiceNow platform. Another one is some of these call routing technologies like Genesis or Calabrio, or we might build out capabilities there. So I want to make sure we build out some other surrounding platforms so that we stay relevant.
Thanks, Will. I guess we'll just keep blazing through these because we have a few and time's running out. So I guess next one was more of a comment from Waleed, which was a case study, but is it actually relevant to our demography? So again, I'll kind of share my 2 cents there, particularly with my experience, having come from Pakistan myself and then building a company that was mostly not in the US. In fact, we had no US employees up until year 4 of the company besides the founders. So my experience has been that the demography becomes only important when you start talking to people about resources, and I'm going to give you 3 engineers, and then they ask you where they are located, and that becomes an interesting conversation. But really, if you're talking about solving a problem, if the problem I'm solving is for pre-seed startups to cut down the time their developers take to deploy a server in the cloud, they're looking for the solution, not looking for the demography of this. And there are some really good examples. There was a firm out of Argentina, South America, where the typical going hourly rate is about $30 an hour. But by specialization and positioning, they are currently charging $175 an hour. And nobody cares because they are providing the solution and they're very good at it. They're the best in the world at that specific niche that they do. And they get to command the rates that they do. We were the same way. I was billing engineers in Pakistan at $200 an hour without any concerns from any customer. And so it's. I think, frankly, if I may make a very strong statement, I think some of that is more in the way we think about our companies and less about the way customers think. If you actually look at data from that book I mentioned earlier, Spiraling Up, the reasons deals are lost in professional services. Demographic and geography of the firm doesn't even make it to the top 10 list. It's not even on their list. So it's mostly in the way we present more than the way the customer actually wants to talk about things. And if you wanted to quickly
The only
add
quick
there.
thing I'll say about that is, again, we don't work with offshore yet, but that's something on our radar. But our employees are all over the United States, so we don't have a single office anywhere. Again, we started during the pandemic, so but that's been a challenge too, is how do you keep the team working together and collaborating when they've never met each other in person. So so it's a virtual organization, which can be challenging.
Well, you and I should talk about that offline for sure. That's all we was virtual. We were in 13 different countries, so could definitely discuss that. But I guess we'll not dive into that today. So the next question is from Jamil. So Will, I think the question's directed to you, which is on the Ironworks, what kind of multiple did you get? I believe you already answered it. It was 8 times EBITDA, I think you said.
It's like 6.5 or 7. I think it was about 7 times.
Seven.
Yeah.
EBITDA. And it was an all cash deal. So that's the second question. What were the terms like? So I guess you already mentioned.
It was all, I mean, it was unique, but it was all cash and all up front. They did, so we could have walked out, after we got the wire to our bank account. But there was an 18% escrow, so a pretty large escrow, and it was large enough that we wanted to stick around the year and a half we had to get to the end of the escrow, or a year. There was no cliff. There was no binding period other than the non-compete, and that was 5 years. And it was really strict. We negotiated the non-compete as strongly as we could, but they've pushed back on everything we wanted to negotiate. So the non-compete was strict. Are they enforceable? I don't know. Compensation was, we negotiated a little bit. We got they were a publicly traded company, so we got a bunch of RSUs, which was nice. Salary wise, it was about the same. So.
And well, kind of a next very targeted question would be, where was most of your energy diluted when you were a journalist? What was kind of the top consumer of your time and energy?
I think it was trying to build build out these different practices in the company. So hiring a leader like the business intelligence, trying to hire a person that was good at business intelligence, and then trying to coach them in building a practice. I think that's where a lot of the wasted time was. Instead of just focusing on one or two things, we were trying to focus on 5 things, and it was not efficient at all.
Yes. Makes perfect sense. And then I think there's a question about Servos, which is, as you're scaling rapidly, you've gone from 2.5 million to 10 million, how has the company, both the culture and the resources, kind of adapted to it?
Yeah, I would say it's been hard. Some of the processes were, broke, and but the thing that I think saved us, and the only thing, and now we're going through another growth spurt that is more challenging, is out of our 10 million in revenue in 2022, a little more than half of it was from one account. So, we did 10 million across 4 clients. So that makes it easier. You only have 4 client relationships you've got to kind of deal with. So now we've got 8 or 9 clients, and it gets exponentially harder because you've got to have that many more people managing those client relationships and the billing and the processes. So this year is definitely going to be a process definition and scale year. How do we put things in place so that we can keep scaling?
That's one big story. I mean, we had processes coming in at 3-4 million. I guess you have scaled a lot faster than we did in that regard. That your revenue is going a lot, definitely going ahead. But that's also because you're super specialized compared to where my firm was. I guess if we were as specialized as you were, combined with offshore, probably would have 90% gross margin.
Yeah, right.
Mission would have been even more effective.
Right.
Yeah, because my firm was mainly specialized just in technologies, but then, and actually that is very relevant to the next question by Asad, which is that how do you differentiate? And so there are different techniques to differentiate. In fact, I'm going to use a slide, which you all will have access to after the session. Fundamentally, there are just 4 ways that services companies will differentiate from each other, which is either you target a specific segment, or you offer a unique pricing model that nobody else is offering to that customer, or you're offering a unique solving a unique problem, or you're offering a unique service solving with the technology. So I think for my company, we were not very clear on our target customer. We became clearer as we got bigger, but that was not our primary differentiator. Our primary differentiator for us used to be more the services offered, because we would always be at the bleeding edge of the technology. So whatever would be the most happening thing in the AWS ecosystem, that's what we would be doing. But compare that to, and that was a good story, but compare that to Will's strategy, and Will, I'll take the liberty of dissecting your positioning. Mm-hmm. You have a target customer. You also are unique in terms of your services being offered and the problem you're solving, specifically going after those outbound state and local, and having an even tighter narrow focus is clearly yielding better results than we saw. So that's kind of the power. There's the risk, which is you might find yourself being too narrow, which is why you do your research before you jump in, and still we can be proven wrong. And I, like Will shared, there were times that he had doubts and there were times I had doubts. But if you don't let that scare you and maintain the courage and patience as well, very aptly put, long term, this actually ends up being a good strategy. So that's kind of some of the different ways you can go through it. And I've actually listed a bunch of examples from actual companies that I have either competed with or advised at different times on how they have actually differentiated themselves. Even with the same technology, sometimes it's just the way you play the game. I guess we are done with the written questions. So we have one hand up. Haris, you want to unmute yourself?
Yeah, good morning. Thank you, Aater and Will. Lovely session. Just had a couple of questions. Actually, the first one has already been answered. It's about, how do you keep that? How do you focus on building a niche? And you said that, there's part of runway and patience that required. So maybe some insights around, when you're close to running out of both, any strategies as founders to cope with that. And secondly, you're generating about 12 million from a team of 50 people. So if you can touch upon, Will, the kind of team mix that you have and the customer engagement model, who goes in, what's the different kind of skill set in your team that you're able to drive that revenue. Thank you.
Actually, do you want to jump in with the second one? I'm also
Yeah,
conscious.
I'll do the second one. Maybe you could answer the first one.
Sure.
The second one is the mix of our team is, I'd say 80%, 75 to 80% of the team are technical ServiceNow developers, configuration, people. So that's the bulk of the team is more technical. We've got 2 user experience design front-end people. We have about 7 or 8 project manager, client manager roles. We have 1 salesperson, and then we've got a recruiter and an HR finance person. So we have pretty low overhead, but the bulk is the technical skills. And on the client engagement side, we kind of use that partner sales seller doer model where the senior project or program managers are the ones that go in on an opportunity. We get a lead from a ServiceNow salesperson, and we go in with a senior engagement or project manager and a solution architect. So sort of a tech lead and a senior PM, and that's who goes in and gathers the information and builds the proposal and the statement of work. And then those are the 2 key people that run the account and the project.
Since kind of out of time here, so I do want to just kind of pause. If anyone has to leave, please feel free. I can stay on for a few more minutes. I don't have a meeting right after this. But I just, and before people start leaving, I just want to remind everyone for the homework for next week as well. So, and I'm definitely available to help. Just send me an email, and we'll share these slides right after the session for everyone's benefit. Now, coming back to the first question, Haris, that you had, which was strategies on how to cope with running out. I think we all, so I think there's some of it is business and some of it is personal, which is handling the stress, because it almost, well, in fact, I would make it stronger. It always works out, is in my experience. I think Will would probably agree with that. But we've all felt that everything's going to crash and burn, and then something comes out. So just holding your nerves personally is usually a very critical aspect of it. But then coming at it beyond emotions, how do you have strategies? I think some of it is about maintaining a very strong financial discipline. So from afar when things are starting to look dangerous. Like, what you don't want it is to find out that you're running out of money next week. And I've actually had founders literally call me this week and say, I don't have money to pay payroll next week. And my question is, well, we'll find the money, that's fine. But the bigger problem is, how did we get here in the first place? So you should be able to predict that. And that requires some discipline and some maturity in your processes. And that's something I recommend every founder to kind of build that foundational baseline to have that forecasting capability, if you will, for the lack of a better word. But then let's just say nothing is working out. That is where you do play with a few knobs, right? If you have a tight position and you have figured out how you get leads, that's where you start to put some gas into your lead generation engine. If you have a scalable one, if you have a systematic way of generating leads. What I've also done is again, by knowing upfront, start to relax the qualifying criteria on leads at times. And I've definitely done that. In fact, I used to have this funny concept at Flux 7. We used to call it the desperation index. So as we became more desperate, the lead scoring criteria became a little less stringent. Not like I'm going to jump. So on a regular day, I had a 10-point checklist on a customer. And on a typical day, I would want at least 7 checks to be there before I would even talk to the customer. But when the desperation is going high, maybe I'll start talking to them at 5 or 6 as well. And then the other piece of it is always knowing, but really that was just more of a Hail Mary solution. The real solution was that we always had these tactics identified, that if we start getting into a lead crunch, these are the tactics. We're going to call more folks at AWS because partners were the source of lead. We're going to become more active on social media because we knew that when we drove traffic to our website, that helped. So, and then we would start calling referrals and give them updates. So some of it is just planning and forecasting and just holding your nerve. That'll be my three. Will, do you want to add something?
No, those are good. Yeah, I think I agree with those as well. And I would say, you know, it's a work in progress too, because even as you get bigger, you still kind of will question your focus too. And one quick thing on ours is we're focused in one area of the ServiceNow platform. We've already started to do some work in the IT help desk ticketing part of the platform, because we're in this one account where we're the only ServiceNow vendor in there, and we don't want to let a competitor in because we don't do another part of the platform. So we're starting to take on more of the platform of ServiceNow, really as a defensive strategy. So
sounds great.
Thank you. That's excellent. Thank you.
Like I said, feel free to take off anybody. I just saw one more question from Jamil, so I'll definitely address that as the probably the last one for today, and we can continue this conversation via Slack or email later. But the question is, what are some of the niche areas you think hold a lot of potential for services companies to position? That actually is, I don't think there is a straight answer, Jamil. Like, I always recommend that when you do position yourself, you position based on, just don't go wild in terms of just choosing something that you have no experience in, or you have no idea or no data on. It's better to stick to something that you have some baseline experience, because at the end of the day, another way to look at positioning is it's not about what you do, frankly, it is about what you say that will maximize your chances of closing a deal. So if you choose something which is really, really cool, which maybe even generate a lot of calls, but when you get on a call, there's no way you can demonstrate the expertise, the purpose is lost. So from that standpoint, I would just caution before I even answer the question. But that said, as far as the niches go, there is no shortage. I mean, AI is pretty hot at this point. Anything related to generative AI is going to take off, as it seems like. If you either have those expertise, or I'm hoping you are asking this question for not 2023, but 2024, because that'll give you the runway to build the practice and the muscle you will need to actually be differentiated in that area, because just saying we do AI isn't enough. So, but let's just say you have a year runway and you're planning a 2024 pivot, 2025 pivot, then I think that AI would definitely be one thing I would double click on right now. Data and AI.
Right. And any ecosystems, like, I mean, AWS had been great for a lot of companies to build their services business around, and then of course exit as well. Any other ecosystems that you think holds a lot of potential for companies to really look into, and potentially for the next couple of years can give a lot of value addition as well as potential opportunity to exit?
I think
so. It's basically about piggybacking on some existing, I would say, ecosystems.
Yeah. So talking about ecosystems, I do have a lot of thoughts there. So ServiceNow is great. You have Snowflake, for example, that's pretty big. Workday, Salesforce ecosystem is still very much thriving. But then going to sort of the slightly less talked about ones, Will actually mentioned a great one. MuleSoft is actually on my list of top 3 right now. I think it's becoming an upcoming one. Atlassian's actually pretty big right now. Then there's even more kind of out there ones, for example, Datadog, Circle CI, ThoughtSpot, companies that are just very much, you have an opportunity to get in very early. In fact, Data Kitchen would be one. And then there's one that everyone's talking about, but it's still pretty early from a partner standpoint. OpenAI is starting to open up their partner program. So you could become a partner for OpenAI. I think they signed up their first 3, as far as I understand, in the last month. And then, in fact, there's some wide open opportunities that I'm seeing that nobody's looking at. One of them would be Airtable. Airtable's partner ecosystem is pretty thin right now, and they're a booming company doing very well, and does require technical expertise to really use it fully. But when I did the research on their partner ecosystem, the biggest partner has just 12 people. So there's a big opportunity, I think, with Airtable. Bubble is the same way, bubble.io, Zscaler. So I have a list of like 40, Jamil, actually, but those are some of my top 10, if you will. And they all
awesome.
Only ones I would add is Okta from identity management is one we're seeing a lot more of, and Twilio. I know Twilio's laid off some people like some of the other tech firms out there, but it's a great platform for partner services.
That's actually Okta and Ping I would add to that list too. Actually, I have that on my longer list. I didn't put it in my top 10. Spot on. Well, that's a miss actually on my part.
So there's this one last question I think we can take from Akil Khan. He's asking about that the conversations are around building ecosystems or ecosystems being built and how to build services around that. But what about the custom application development services?
So
how do you see that space? Though it's a very open space, not a niche space, custom application development, but how do you see that?
Frankly, I would say custom application development has to be turned into a niche. If you do custom application development, find your niche in there. Whether that's around, it can be around any of those dimensions we talked about, right? It can be around maybe you service a specific customer. I'll give you a good example. In fact, somebody I was talking to a few months ago, they do custom application development, but just focused on public-facing applications for nonprofit organizations with less than $100 million in revenue. So it is still custom development. What they do is what they do, but they understand that segment so well that they can go and talk to the customer and tell them about what the customer needs to see on their website, not the other way around, because that's the only thing they do. And that's basically a way that the niche is not only about technology, it is about just having a deep understanding of your customer as well. It can be very much about that too. So that would be just one example, but that's, I would say, attaching yourself to an ecosystem has other benefits, which is to get leads out of the ecosystem, as we discussed. But frankly, just saying you do custom application development, even today, we actually looked at, if you remember, Jamil, the first slide I posted where I just did an analysis of the companies we had present here today. Custom application development was already being used by most of us on the call right here. So if just a non-random sample of just 25 people, it's already being used by most of them. There's probably literally a million other companies that are saying the same thing around the world. So that just saying custom app development is even not good enough today, I guess. Don't even need to wait for 2 to 3 years to say,
sure,
make that it's not a good place to be, frankly.
Yeah, the only thing
sure.
I would add to that is pick an ecosystem or a platform that allows you to do custom development you get in the door with the platform that you know how to do. And then, because custom development, as we know, is where you can have these big, massive projects. So, I mean, I still feel like the turnkey implementations are not going to get big enough. So I would say, because that's what we're doing with ServiceNow, we get in to implement a simple customer service or citizen service thing, and then we end up building all these custom applications on top of the platform. And that's where the revenue's coming from for us.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Will Loving and Aater Suleman. Thank you so much for your time for this informative first session of the series. We really appreciate all the time, all the experiences that you are able to share with us. Definitely a lot of takeaways to take back home, improvise, and for us to really think our positioning again, think our niche again, think how we could be able to stay competitive in the growing market. Thank you so much. I think this is the end of the session. We'll look forward to the next one coming up next week. And in the meanwhile, of course, a lot of back and forth around the homework. For all the participants, we'll be sharing this this webinar recorded version, as well as the notes from authors and Will's discussion, and the homework as well. So thank you all. Have a great evening. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank
so much, Will.
you. Bye-bye. Have a nice day. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.